Hello and welcome to the Human Restoration Project podcast. My name is Nick Covington. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this episode is brought to you by our supporters, three of whom are Kevin Gannon, Kimberly Baker, and Simeon Frang. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. Today's episode is Dr. Sarah Fine's keynote, The Quest for Authenticity, Lessons in Powerful Learning from the Fringes, from our conference to restore humanity back in July of this year. As Dr. Fine argues, the limits of our grammar of schooling and the metaphors we use to think about teaching and learning are constraining, but there's nothing inevitable or inherent about them. This is the through line in her observation of co-constructed and collaborative humanized learning spaces, where inevitability gives way and possibility predominates. Not only is it possible to change the grammar of schooling, but that humanizing grammar already exists within even the most traditionally structured school, Sarah argues, in electives, clubs, and extracurriculars at the periphery. These spaces, she points out, offer, quote, the hallmarks of a learner-centered system, trust, safety, and authentic care, where learners and educators co-design coursework, end quote. And as Sarah and her co-author Jal Mehta urge in their 2019 book, In Search of Deeper Learning, quote, we need to change student learning, so we need to change schools, so we need to change systems, end quote. You can find a video version of this on the Human Restoration Project YouTube channel, and of course, you can learn more about Human Restoration Project on our website, humanrestorationproject.org, and connect with us everywhere on social media.
Welcome, everybody, to this Flip keynote address. My name is Sarah Fine, and I'm honored to be with you for the Conference to Restore Humanity. I just have to say, this is the most fitting name for a conference I could possibly imagine, given the moments that we are living through collectively right now. And before I jump in, I do want to say this is the first time I've ever done a flipped keynote, so I just welcome your grace as I venture into new territory with you. So, just to begin, I am quite certain that everybody watching has encountered the teenage refrain that school is boring. I've certainly heard plenty of it from my own high school students when I was in the classroom and I began my teaching career. And as somebody who still spends a lot of time in middle and high school classrooms, I know that not much has changed since then. And it's not just anecdotal. Nearly 20 years ago, findings from a survey of more than 80,000 adolescents across the United States found that 3/4 of all high school students felt bored in school every day, with more than a third reporting that they saw no personal relevance in the material that they were required to learn. In the decades since these data were first released, the situation has gotten worse. In one recent study, only 4% of adolescent students reported having a learning environment that regularly let them develop their own ideas or have a say about what happened to them. Boring certainly captures one of the essential problems of the American secondary school: an absence of sizzle, a lack of playfulness, a sense of purposeless slog. A few years ago, though, a young man named Damien, a 12th grade student at a school in Chula Vista, California, near where I live, reframed the problem in a way that I've never forgotten. It's not that school is boring, he told me. It's that school is fake. I knew instantly what he meant, which was that he experienced academic learning as being arbitrary and contrived, an elaborate artifice with few real connections to his lived experiences, his community, or his sense of self. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Damien's comment provides a lens into the project to which I've devoted my career, which is the project of transforming schools into more humanizing and vital spaces to teach and learn. Characterizing school as fake rather than just as boring captures the fact that classroom learning is often essentially inauthentic. It involves practicing skills out of context, learning about things at a distance, trying to make sense of the world without the embodied and social emotional dimensions that come along with direct experience. What Damien didn't say is that when learners experience school as being fake, the consequences for them are all too real. So let's begin with students for whom academic learning is fake, but also useful. These are the students who become invested in playing the game of school for the purposes of achieving some desired end, like a grade, a score on a test, admissions to college, approval by family or community. The logic here is straightforward. Even if the curriculum feels artificial, learning school stuff in school ways will get you where you want to go. But the rules that govern school-sanctioned ways of knowing, as we know, are usually a reflection of racial capitalism, settler colonialism, white supremacy culture, and the many other hegemonic viewpoints that are baked into this country's identity. So when learners play the game of school for long enough, and especially when they're validated over and over again for playing it well, there are risks for internalizing these values and then feeding them back into the system when they become parents or policymakers or educators. And unfortunately, it gets worse because there are also young people who experience school as being fake to the point of toxicity. These are learners who are deprived of opportunities to make rich connections between academic content and their lived experiences, who are diminished or rendered invisible by the curriculum, and for whom playing the game of school is either out of reach or too hard a pill to swallow. We all know too well what happens in these cases. This is a story of chronic absenteeism and frequent discipline referrals and the school to prison pipeline. And of course, this story is one disproportionately experienced by BIPOC youth, youth who identify as LGBTQ+, youth who are learning English, and youth with disabilities. I wish I were overstating the case, but over the course of the last 20 years, I've spent thousands of hours in more than 50 secondary schools across the US and Canada. And the realities that I'm describing are depressingly pervasive. And again, it's just not me. There is a large body of work which documents the ways in which oppressive schooling practices negatively impact already marginalized students. So this is all pretty heavy. But, and here I hope you'll pivot with me toward a space of possibility, I want to suggest that the fakeness of school is not inevitable. There are and always have been positive outliers, schools and classrooms and moments in time where the relationship between learners and content is transformative rather than toxic, where watching the clock gives way to focus and flow, where the boundary between artificial and authentic becomes blurry to the point of irrelevant, and where shallowness gives way to depth and learning is not a game anymore. This quest for this kind of deep and authentic learning and the desire to understand and spread the conditions that produce it is the through line to my work, and I think it's the reason that I'm here with you today. What I want to share with you is one of the more surprising conclusions that my work has surfaced, which is that the places where deep and authentic learning tends to flourish are places where we don't always think to look. Elective courses, career and technical education pathways, alternative education programs, and extracurricular activities. So today I'm going to explore a few specific examples of what learning looks like in what I'm going to call these fringe learning spaces. And as I do, I invite you to ask yourself the question I'm going to return to at the end of this talk and that I'd love to talk more about during the Q&A, which is what if, instead of viewing these spaces as an educational afterthought, we treated them as a blueprint for what schools and educational systems could become? I want to start with an example drawn from my decade-long collaboration with Jal Mehta, which produced our 2019 book, In Search of Deeper Learning, The Quest to Remake the American High School. And I guess I should note here, in case you couldn't already tell, that most of my work has been focused on teenagers and their experiences in school. Many of the ideas I'm going to explore, however, have parallels in elementary education. So I invite any of you who work with the littles to ask about those connections during the live Q&A session that we'll have together. So as Jal and I began our work together back in 2010, we were steered by two shared convictions. First, we believe that under the right conditions, schools can be places of powerful learning and development. And second, we believe that the No Child Left Behind era had pulled schools away from those goals. And so in our work, we asked, what does it mean? And what does it look like? And what might it require for all high school students to experience powerful learning regularly? In addition to that, we wanted to know about the policies, the school models, the leadership stances, and the pedagogical approaches that offered a promising path forward. So over the course of 6 years, we visited 30 different high schools around the country, deliberately seeking to capture a range of promising approaches to teaching and learning. In total, we spent more than 750 hours observing classrooms, and we interviewed more than 300 students, teachers, leaders, and parents. And the book that we eventually wrote from this work was over 400 pages. So I guess I should tell some of you to read it if you're intrigued. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus on just one of our many findings, going back to what I referred to before, which is that the conditions for deep learning are often more fully present in peripheral or fringe school spaces, such as elective courses and extracurricular activities, than in core academic classes. And to explore this idea right now, I want to double click on a single afternoon that we spent at a school that I'm going to call Achievement High, which is a pseudonym in case you didn't figure that out. So to set the scene, Achievement High serves around 2,000 predominantly white and Asian students in an upper middle class suburban district in the Northeast United States. Despite a major renovation to add innovative spaces, such as a state-of-the-art science lab to its campus, Achievement High remains heavily reliant on traditional structures, such as the 7-period schedule, bells, lockers, etc., or what Tayek and Cuban dubbed the grammar of schooling. The culture of the school's academic courses revolved around heavy tracking, racking up AP courses and exams scores, and securing admission into selective colleges. As one teacher at Achievement High put it to us, the most commonly heard word in the hallways was, "What'd you get?" So on the afternoon I want to describe right now, we were shadowing a 12th grade student that I'm going to call Emily. Emily was a middle-class white student whose perceived academic ability had landed her in the college prep track at Achievement High. The last period of Emily's day was a senior English course where students had been reading Hamlet. The class lasted the standard 50 minutes, during which the teacher screened several film adaptations of the to be or not to be speech, facilitated a brief discussion, and then handed out a quote matching worksheet. The general feeling of the period was one of listlessness. Only 6 of the 26 students participated verbally. The discussion of the differences among the two films lasted a short 5 minutes, and most of the questions that students asked were about what would be on the upcoming quiz. This is the version of high school that Ted Sizer famously described in Horace's Compromise in the 80s. Teachers pretending to teach and students pretending to learn until the bell rings and everybody can go home. After the bell rang, we followed Emily through the school's hallways to the downstairs auditorium, where she was the stage manager for an upcoming production of A Servant of Two Masters. As we entered the backstage area, there was a palpable and dramatic shift in her energy and in the energy of the space itself. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from the notes that we took on that day. Students bound in through the double doors and begin chatting with their friends. The stage crew kids are buzzing around the stage, putting some finishing touches on a railing which has been just attached to the upper deck. Emily is reading through the script and preparing for the day. After 10 minutes, Ben, the adult director of the show, calls the kids together and offers a brief agenda of the scenes that they're going to run today. The students instantly quiet down and listen attentively. The action kicks off with warm-ups. First verbal warm-ups led by some of the show's senior actors, then mental warm-ups led by Ben. And then for 2 hours, the students rehearse, stopping for feedback from each other as well as from the adults in the space. Intrigued by the stark contrast between the English 12 class and the theater rehearsal, Jal and I followed The Servant of Two Masters production from its inception until the night of the show. We triangulated what we learned from this deep dive with what we observed in other fringe contexts, such as debate, Model UN, school newspaper, STEP team, and elective courses. It was this process that gradually helped us to see that the periphery, or the fringe, has a completely different and much more promising grammar than that of the academic core. So what are the key features of this second grammar of schooling? In order to explore this question, I'm going to use the Servant of Two Masters production as an example. But as I talk, I invite you to think about other activities such as the ones that I just described. So first, there was choice. The theater production was a voluntary community. As one of the actors put it, "I'm happier to be at rehearsal than in class because it's something that I want to do, that I love to do with people who want to do it." This underscores the simple but critical point that elective activities position adolescents as humans who can be trusted to make meaningful choices about how to use their time and who benefit from opportunities to explore the endeavors that call to them. Second, there was a sense of community. Emily and her peers identified themselves as being theater kids. Their participation had become core to their identities. In turn, this led to peer-to-peer interactions that extended beyond the boundaries of the show. As one of the students put it, if I'm talking to you in the scene, I should talk to you outside of it because I want to know who you are as a person. Whereas in class, you might work in groups and you sound interesting, but then you're back in rows and you forget about it. Third, there were opportunities for apprenticeship learning. The students who had been involved in other theater productions worked with the newbies, taking on more and more leadership roles as their expertise deepened. You can see this in the fact that the senior actors were leading the warm-up, and in the fact that the students offering each other feedback during rehearsals were participating as real leaders of the show. It also shows up in the fact that the show had a student director as well as an adult director, and the two collaborated to pull the production together. Fourth, the learners had interdependent roles. Unlike in core academic classes, students were not all doing the same things at the same time and then being asked to demonstrate their mastery via identical tasks. The students running the lights and the students making the set and the students playing the acted roles all had different responsibilities and different skill sets, but they also had to rely on each other and figure out how to coordinate their work. Here's how Emily put it. If anyone is out or sick, it puts a damper on the whole process. You can function, but it's not going to be the best because every part is crucial and every person is there for a reason. And just by contrast, when we talked to Ben, the show's director, he talked about how in his Spanish class, which is his day job, if a kid was asleep in a corner, it didn't really matter. But in the theater production, it was a powerful impact on the whole quality of the work. So finally, the work had an authentic audience and authentic standards for quality. Working together to make something that had a real audience lent rehearsals a sense of momentum and meaning. Relatedly, the standards of quality for the show came not from some 5x5 rubric, but rather from the impact the actors were able to have on the audience come showtime. Would the audience laugh at the moments that were designed to be funny? Would they catch the double meanings? Would the end seem tragicomic as planned? These questions are connected to the ways of thinking that characterize the domain of professional theater, so the students' work had meaningful ties to the world beyond school. So just stepping back for a minute here, it's easy to imagine a parent or a policymaker commenting that it's nice that Emily and her peers were engaged in something enjoyable after school. In my view, though, and what I want to argue right now is that it's much more than nice. There is, I believe, something truly radical about creating a learning environment where students experience an alternative to the instrumental and individualistic logic that dominates so much of American society and so many American classrooms. What was happening in the Servant of Two Masters production connects to a set of ancient and powerful traditions. Traditions where everybody has a role to play, where everybody can both teach and learn, and where people depend on each other's varied talents to create something bigger than the sum of the parts. If young people experience these kinds of messages and experiences consistently over the course of their 13 or more years in formal education, just imagine the world that they might be able to create together as adults. So we're going to shift a little bit now to a related strand of work, which is much more recent to my career. So specifically, I'm going to talk about a project which is in the process of becoming my second book. And the book is co-authored with Santiago Rincon Gallardo and Michael Fullen. And with any luck, it will be out next March from Corwin Press. So keep your eyes open. I also want to say the book does not yet have a real cover. So the Human Restoration Project has helped me to create a generic one, which you're seeing right now. So please don't take any pictures of it. So as the book's title suggests, the project is less focused on schools and more on school systems. Beyond that, though, the goals and methodology of the project are very similar to the one that I did with Jal. We identified 6 education systems across the state of California, which are all in different ways and in very different contexts doing promising work related to transforming the high school experience. We explored these places by doing a wide range of school and classroom observations and by conducting in-depth interviews with many different stakeholders. On paper, our work was guided by academic research questions related to systemic strategies for improving adolescent learning and well-being at scale. In interviews, however, we stripped away the jargon. With educators, we asked, where are teenagers thriving in your schools? What has been the district's role in helping to make that happen? And with students, we asked, where do you feel most alive at school? It's a very simple question, and it reveals some very powerful answers. So by now, you probably won't be shocked to hear that one of the most powerful patterns that emerged from this work was that the spaces where adolescents are thriving in school are not usually their core academic classes. To the contrary, many of the core academic courses that we visited across the 6 districts remained depressingly stagnant. In a math class, students anxiously copied worksheet answers from each other. In a history class, a few students took notes on a lecture while the rest stared out the window. In an English class, some students listened to the audiobook version of a novel, while others sent text messages on half-hidden phones. There were, of course, bright spots, classrooms where teachers had found ways to reignite students with a sense of connection and authentic purpose. But these were the exception rather than the norm, just as Jal and I had found a decade earlier. That is the bad news, and I always like to start with bad and move to good. The good news is that across the 6 districts that we studied, there were many spaces where teenagers were learning deeply and finding an authentic sense of purpose, including but not limited to extracurricular spaces like the Servant of Two Masters production I described. But in this instance, the most consistently vital spaces were actually the career and technical education pathway courses, which I'm going to shorthand as CTE. CTE has long occupied a peripheral space within high schools, with traditional pathways such as auto tech historically being treated as a kind of dumping ground for students labeled as non-college worthy. In recent years, however, CTE has begun to experience an incredible renaissance. When we walked into CTE courses across high schools in Fresno Unified School District, for example, we saw deep engagement in newly reimagined high-wage, high-skill pathways. In a media arts pathway course, students clustered in front of desktop computers immersed in a digital storytelling project about the affordable housing crisis. In an agricultural technology pathway course, students were learning to operate a laser cutter, which they were using to create a chicken-shaped cover for a drain outside the coops they had built for the school's beloved hens. In an entrepreneurship pathway course, students practiced presenting for the pitch decks that they had created for their clients, which were local mom and pop businesses that could not afford a marketing team. These CTE spaces were positively bursting with the qualities that I described in the previous case: choice, community, interdependence, apprenticeship, and authentic audiences. In addition, when we talked with the young people in these CTE courses, we encountered a deeply moving sense of purpose and momentum. When we asked them about their pathways, they were animated and effusive, explaining in detail their current work and chattering about their plans for the future, such as dual enrollment courses, summer internships, and college. CTE then is one more example of how programs within secondary schools and secondary education systems that have historically been treated as peripheral to the core of schooling carry powerful lessons about how to design for deep and authentic learning. In this study, we also found that the notion of learning from the fringes held true at a more macro level. What I mean by this is that some of the most powerful examples of secondary education transformation came from some of the most unassuming districts. To demonstrate this, I want to take you for a moment to Lindsay, California, which I'm guessing that very few of you have ever heard of. Located in the far eastern region of the Central Valley, Lindsay is tiny, isolated, and very agricultural. To enter the town from the north, south, or west is to drive through endless miles of industrial orange groves, along narrow roads crisscrossed by railroad tracks. There's no entrance to Lindsay on the east side. The town ends where the treeless Sierra Nevada foothills begin rising toward the snowy peaks above. Of the 6 districts that we studied for this work, Lindsay is the most deeply impacted by opportunity gaps. Of Lindsay's 12,600 residents, 90% identify as Latino or Hispanic, 30% live below the federal poverty line, and only 5% of adults have completed a bachelor's degree or above. The town has few job opportunities outside of agricultural and municipal work. However, despite these obstacles, the unified school system in Lindsay is doing incredible work related to the learning and well-being of its adolescents. The district's known, among those who know it, for its competency-based approach, which it developed almost 20 years ago after a group of teachers, leaders, and community members decided together that it wasn't working to expect all kids to learn the same thing at the same pace. Long before personalization was a buzzword in education, Lindsay's educators started to work through the complex puzzle of what it might look like to make sure that all learners got the support that they needed exactly when they needed it. What struck us most about Lindsay, however, was not their competency-based systems, although those were very interesting. Instead, it was actually the incredible youth-centered ethos, one where adolescents were trusted to lead, learn, and contribute. And in that spirit, I want to read you an excerpt from our notes on Lindsay when we spent some time there. A group of seniors at the district's alternative high school sit in a circle during their hour-long advisory period and share their feelings about their imminent transition to adult life. They are remarkably raw and vulnerable with each other. One student talks about her fear of leaving Lindsay's rural and tight-knit community and attending college in the city. Another shares that it feels both exciting and heavy to know that he will soon have to support himself financially. There are murmurs, nods, fist bumps, and even some tears. The feeling of the space is one of incredible trust, safety, and authentic care. We encounter a similar feeling later in the morning as we sit with a group of sophomores in a conference room. These students, each of whom have had difficulty thriving in a comprehensive high school environment, talk about the ways in which they feel empowered to seek support for their needs. A young woman who describes herself as struggling with trust issues tells us that she feels seen, heard, and supported by the adults in the school community. We can advocate for needing space or whatever, and they actually listen to us, she says. Later in the conversation, she tells us that she and her peers have been working with their teachers and advisors to co-design next year's class experiences, including the academic curriculum. Hearing these multiply marginalized adolescents talk so passionately about their personal growth and sense of agency is quite moving to us. What is also moving is that at this campus, as at the main high school in Lindsay, we've been left alone to talk with them. For more than 2 hours during our first day in Lindsay, it's the young people who are the main source of information about the district's vision and values and practices. There's very little adult commentary or curation. In fact, there are very few adults involved at all, and that's the point. The students are trusted to run the show. I try not to play favorites among the many schools and districts that I've spent time in, but I think it's safe to say that I left a little part of my heart in Lindsay. It's a system that barely registers in state conversations about the future of schooling, but I dare say that I think it should. The alternative high school in Lindsay is at the absolute periphery of California's broader secondary education system. It's the fringe of the fringe, if you will. But there's much to be learned from the deeply authentic ways in which Lindsay's young people and adults are collaborating to make consequential decisions about how they will engage together. Stepping back, it's been increasingly clear to me through these projects that it's at the margins of our broader secondary education system where the soil is most fertile when it comes to deep and authentic learning. There's both bad and good news connected to this insight, and as you might guess, I'm going to start with the bad news. So the bad news is obvious. The spaces that many system leaders and policymakers and even educators see as core to the system, namely core academic courses, continue to be dogged by the same old problems of inauthenticity and intellectual stagnation that have been documented for decades. Despite all the carrots and sticks, and despite the millions or maybe billions of dollars invested in standards development and new textbooks and PLC programs, the core has not budged. If the recent NAEP scores are any indication, in fact, things have maybe even gotten worse. The good news, though, is that we don't have to dream up what the alternative might look or feel like. It already exists. And in many cases, it exists just down the hall, or in the CTE building at the back of campus, or perhaps at the alternative high school on the other side of town. And so in closing, I want to return to the question that I posed near the start of this talk. What if, instead of viewing these fringe spaces as an educational afterthought, we treated them as a blueprint for what schools could become? What would it mean to design educational systems so that they centered rather than push to the edges qualities such as choice, apprenticeship, interdependence, and authentic performances for authentic audiences? What if well-being and a sense of authentic shared purpose, co-constructed by young people and educators, served as the starting point for our systems? The DNA of our existing system makes it very difficult to imagine such a reality, and yet it's clear that what we have is not working, and the stakes for our young people couldn't be any higher. That is where I'm going to end today, and I just thank you so much for watching it. I'm really excited to have a conversation with all of you when we have a chance to be together on the 21st. And I invite you to ask me about anything that I've said during this talk, if you're interested. And also, there are some things that I've been working on and published recently that I did not have a chance to talk about. For example, I just published an article about the dangers of real-world learning when this kind of learning is done without sufficient criticality. And I see that strand is very connected to what I just talked about. So please, I invite you to ask me about that as well if you are interested. I really look forward to our conversation, and I appreciate your grace during this Flip keynote, and I will see you all very soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you again for listening to our podcast at Human Restoration Project. I hope this conversation leaves you inspired and ready to start making change. If you enjoyed listening, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast player. Plus, find a whole host of free resources, writings, and other podcasts all for free on our website, humanrestorationproject.org. Thank you.